in the American South class. And so what I also wanted to do for this semester was to highlight some of the other folk life aspects of other classes that we have at Piedmont College. So Dr. Staples, she's always working with y'all about certain kinds of oral traditions, certainly ballads and other types of things. And then Dr. Smith has her students do medical microbiology, and so we've looked at the ways people used to think of how you get diseases, like witchcraft and things like that. But our highlight of this semester is having a guest like Jackie Elsner, who is the librarian from the Oconee County Library, the head librarian at Oconee County Library. She's known widely in this area for her enthusiastic, wonderful storytelling, and she's going to give us stories and ballads for today. So this is I'll let her say whatever. So please put away your electronic devices for today and just enjoy and absorb this experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. So I'm Jackie Elsner, and I tell stories, sing ballads, and then when I conclude, I'll share another unique connection to ballads in Georgia. But I have lived where, I have enjoyed knowing and learning exactly what your folk life celebration today is. The stories, what I talk about is the culture of the Europeans who came to the North Georgia Mountain, to the Appalachians. And some of it's song and some of it's story. But I'm going to begin with an old ballad. And we're all adults, and I could never perform this to a family group because these old ballads were about murder and adultery and suicide and cutting off heads and it just child abandonment. They just topics, but that are they're extremely exciting storytelling. And just so you know, they were sung in among the folk. This is the Europeans that came to the Appalachians. They came from Scotland, Ireland, Wales, Northern Ireland, Ireland. Particularly the ones who settled in the southern Appalachians came from Scotland. First, they were shoved out of the lowlands of Scotland and over to Northern Ireland, and then they came to America. And many of them came through Virginia or maybe in Philadelphia. And they eventually just kept heading west. And they eventually settled in the mountains, the Appalachian Mountains. For several reasons, they were incredible individualists. They didn't believe in central government. They believed in, my home is my castle. What I say goes. They didn't believe in much taxation. They were of a fighting disposition, argumentative disposition. So oftentimes they just didn't get along with people terribly well. So when they got into the mountains, it meant several things. It looked just like home. And it felt just like home. And they saw no reason to go anywhere else. And it was extremely isolating. These were in the 1700s to the mid-1800s. And when you realize, just show of hands, how many have been up in the mountains of North Georgia, western North Carolina? Okay. Well, just in the past 30 years, the roads up there got better. But can you imagine doing all that with wagons? You just don't go terribly far, and you don't go terribly many miles in one day, and you're extremely isolated. So what happened was their culture just sunk in there, and it didn't get affected by anybody else. And they kept patterns of speech that are Elizabethan. They kept stories that were forgotten. They kept these old ballads, and they kept more versions of the ballads, more verses of the ballads than were remembered by the people back in the old country. And this was established in the early 20th century with some musicologists. They'd already done all the collecting. People are still doing collecting of these ballads in Europe. But Cecil Sharp and Olive Dame Campbell worked together, and they came into the southern Appalachians, and they visited all these tiny little communities and would listen to people sing ballads and transcribe them. And they realized more ballads were remembered, more versions of the ballads, and more verses of these versions. Because these people simply, this was what they did for recreation. This is how, And they sang. They just sang. These cultures sang. It wasn't about an event or a gathering at someone's home. They just sang. You know, one of these, Young Emily, was one that the ballad singer I learned it from. She said this is what her great aunt sang as she milked the cows. And so every time she sings Young Emily, she smells fresh milk. These were simply, they weren't work songs like you think of the, you know, other cultures and other situations have work songs. These were just, they just sang. So I'm going to sing you Blackjack Davy because it's just a rip roar. And this was recorded by Almeda Riddle from Arkansas. And this is one of those songs that's in a million versions. This is her version. Oh, Blackjack Davy came a-riding by, a-whistling so merrily. He made the woods all around him ring, and he charmed the heart of a lady. He charmed the heart of a lady. Will you go with me, my pretty little one? Oh, go with me, my honey. I swear by the beard upon my chin that you'll never want for money. No, you'll never want for money. Pull off those high-heeled shoes all made of Spanish leather. Put on your loyal boots and we'll ride off together. Oh, we'll ride off together. She pulled off her high-heeled shoes all made of Spanish leather, got behind him on his horse, and they rode off together, and they rode off together. That night her husband, he came home just a-looking for his lady. Her maid, she spoke before she thought, said she's gone with Blackjack Davy, she's gone with Blackjack Davy. Oh, saddle me up my coal black stud, my white one's not so speedy. I've rode all day and I'll ride all night, and I'll overtake my lady, and I'll bring home my lady. He rode all night at broad daylight, he came to a river a-raging. There he spied his darling bride in the arms of Blackjack Davy, in the arms of Blackjack Davy. Pull off those long black gloves, they're made of Spanish leather, and get behind me on my horse, and we'll ride home together, and we'll ride home together. She pulled off those long black gloves all made of Spanish leather. She gave to him her lily white hand, but said goodbye forever. She said goodbye forever. Would you forsake your house and home? Would you forsake your baby? Would you forsake your wedded love and go with Blackjack Davy, and go with Blackjack Davy? Last night I slept in a warm feather bed between my husband and baby. Tonight I'll sleep on the cold, cold ground in the arms of Blackjack Davy, in the arms of Blackjack Davy. And in other versions, you get a couple more verses where she ends up barefoot and pregnant and nowhere. Okay. Anyway, that's one of Blackjack Davy, and that is the Gypsy Laddie. There are a vast number of versions of that song. And what I've learned in my love of these stories and songs is they are told cross cultures. You know, there's these kind of songs in French literature and Russian and, you know, in European countries. There are motifs that go among these stories and ballads that are shared. So I just think it's cool. I think it's totally cool. So another one, I thought I'd sing y'all what would be considered in the greatest hits, Barbara Allen. Y'all ever heard of Barbara Allen? Where did I learn these songs? I learned them from recordings. I first heard a 7th generation North Carolina ballad singer named Sheila K. Adams in performance at the National Storytelling Festival. And she's from this culture. And I just love these ballads and stories. So, you know, I buy her CD, I listen to them. And I then discovered a unique place in the state of Georgia, state parks. Amicalola State Park has something, the only backcountry inn in Georgia. It's called the Linfoot Hike-In. You hike 5 miles, you stay overnight, you hike 5 miles back. Only way to get there, you cannot drive. You cannot say, I'm taking the tram. No, you have to hike. So anyway, I've been volunteering there for 10 years, and I'm a program volunteer. And it was there I had the chance to perform and work out these things, because I have been a children's librarian for 20 years. Well, you cannot sing Blackjack Davy to a bunch of, even 5th graders, right? The teachers would, the parents would call and say, what in the world happened in school today? And I would never be invited back. So then the other traditional ballad singer, and these are people from the culture that I got their CDs and listened to, is Jean Ritchie. Now, Jean Ritchie's must be almost, she might be 90 this year. She is from Kentucky, the mountains in Kentucky, and her family, she was the youngest, or almost the youngest in the family, like 13 children, and so if she's born 1923, her siblings are being born, earlier than that. And, but their family just knew ballads. Well, what happened with Jean Ritchie is she went to college and she married a man from New York City. And she moved out of the mountains of Kentucky. And in our parlance, her husband became her roadie. Y'all know roadie? That's the person who travels with a musician, sets up their equipment, gets all the wires and the cables and all those amplifiers and all that business. The roadie totes all that stuff. Well, that's what Jean Ritchie's husband did. And this is in 45, 50, and he gets her recording in New York City. And so she made these recordings, all these wonky ancient ballads. And by the early 60s, there's what was called the Great Folk Scare. There was a revival of all this traditional music before the Beatles happened. And then she was kind of part of that. Well, because her husband did that for her, he made it possible that she went all over the world singing these things. And she played the lap dulcimer. They went to, she got a Guggenheim, and they went over to Ireland and, compared all this business. But I'm just telling you, how do you learn this stuff now from the people who were from that culture? You can still do it. And then there's all the country and western music came out of this. Are any of y'all country and western listeners? Maybe not, whatever, but you know of it, okay. And all the themes in country and western, where it's always love gone wrong, and everything's terrible, and you're treated awful, and you keep going with the bad one. Well, that comes out of these old ballads. So I'll stop talking about that and sing you Barbie Allen, because Barbie Allen would have been the top greatest hit. There's a lot of versions of Barbie Allen. This is Sheila K. Adams' version. In Scarlet Town, where I was born, there was a fair maid dwelling, and every youth cried well a day, and they called her Barbie Allen. Well, it was in the month of May, when all gay flowers were a-blooming, sweet William on his deathbed lay, for the want of Barbie Allen. He called his servant to his bed, and bade him quickly leave him to fetch that fair maid to his side. That fair maid Barbie Allen. Well, he searched high and he searched low, till at last he drew nigh her, saying, "Pretty fair maid, come and fly with me, if your name be Barbie Allen." Well, slow lie, she got up, slow as she drew nigh him, but all she said at his bedside was, "Young man, I believe you're dying. Don't you recall last Saturday night when you and we and all were at the tavern? You raised a toast to the ladies all, but you slighted Barbary Allen. Yes, I remember last Saturday night when we gathered at the tavern. I gave a toast to the ladies all, but my heart to Barbary Allen. Oh, take it back, I'll keep it not. You slighted me so sorely. Come Saturday night at the tavern near, I'll serve you just as poorly. He turned his face all towards the wall. A sigh it did escape him. That night sweet William breathed his last from the loss of Barbary Allen. As she was riding through the town, she heard the death bells tolling, and with each stroke they seemed to say, "Hard-hearted Barbary Allen. Oh, mother, make up my bed. Make it both long and narrow. Sweet William died for me last night. I'll die for him tomorrow." They found her there the very next morn, as though she sweet lie sleeping, with a note that said, "Farewell to all. I'm finished with my grieving." They buried William in the old graveyard, and Barbary they laid nigh him, and out in his grave grew a blood-red rose, and out in hers a briar. They grew and grew to the graveyard gate, where they could grow no higher, and there they tied in a true lover's knot, with the rose wrapped round the briar. Okay, so I can tell you a story because we got another half hour and I got a whole bunch to do. All right, so stories. Stories I'm going to tell you. Many of these old stories. I've been telling them for years. I absolutely love them. The Jack Tales, and I saw in one of your presentations and in some of the books that y'all have on display, stuff that I go, oh no. So these old Jack Tales, Jack and the Beanstalk. Right, everybody knows that. Well, Jack's a character in these wonder tales. They're adventure tales, they're tall tales. I mean, one of them I make it into like a mixed martial arts thing. I mean, it's just wonky. But these Jack Tales are simply a story with this character named Jack. And they're told in Russia with Ivan and in Germany with Hans, and they're just told everywhere. It's just that the British Isles folk, their guy was Jack. And so, first, as a librarian, I'm getting these stories from a collection from Richard Chase, the folklorist. He published them in the 30s. And this is where every library in America has Jack Tales and Grandfather Tales by Richard Chase. And in the back are all his little, I learned this from this lady, and I heard it from that lady, and I heard it from this person. So, that's what I use. But I'm a storyteller, and I go to storytelling stuff. And Donald Davis is from the mountains of western North Carolina. And he's from this tradition, and he's a professional storyteller. He got out of being a Methodist minister, and he's making a whole bunch more money as a storyteller. Have any of y'all heard Donald Davis or heard of him? Okay. So, when I get his book, Jack Always Seeks His Fortune, Appalachian Authentic, and he's saying, there's a folklorist, Joseph Sobel, the East Tennessee State University has a master's degree in storytelling, and Dr. Sobel is a professor there. And so, I'm reading Donald Davis's Jack Tales, and I go, whoa, these are better. Because he got them from his grandmother. You know, he wasn't a folklorist collecting it. He was a child listening to it. So, I'm going to tell you how Jack fooled the miller. And Donald Davis says, this is just what he grew up with. And he goes to college, and he takes English, and Chaucer's Reeve's Tale is the story his grandmother told. Okay? Okay. So here is how Jack fooled the miller. So I always invite everybody to take a nice deep breath so we get ready for this. All right, so this is one of the stories when Jack is living with his mama and his older brothers Tom and Will. And Jack's daddy's off working on the road crew or something. He's not there. But in this story, Jack and Tom and Will, his older brother, and his mother, they're all kind of concerned about, there's a miller in their settlement, and the miller is just full of, he just brags all the time. And he always brags about nobody can cheat him. And the miller is just, he's always going on about what a big guy he is and nobody can cheat him. And everybody's kind of, they're fed up with listening to this miller. But people did have to grant the miller something, that he had to be a pretty tricky character. Because this miller was over 60 years old. And he had a young wife who was about 16, and they had a new baby child who was a little bit under a year. So the miller had something going. Well, the miller kept on saying how nobody could cheat him out of anything. Nobody could trick him out of things. And that while the miller was around, nobody could steal anything from him. Not a bit. They couldn't trick him, and they couldn't steal from him. And in case anybody managed either one of those, to trick the miller or steal from him, the miller that very day would sign over the deed to his mill and also sign over all his possessions. So this gets all the men in the settlement all interested. They're all trying to figure it out. And Jack and his brothers, Tom and Will, they're kind of like, we'll let those other people try to out-trick the miller. That's okay. We'll give them a turn. Jack kept thinking, I don't want to tangle with that old fella. Because, you know, the miller had a mill. This is pretty much, y'all went up to Raven Gap to Foxfire, right? So you saw, oh, the miller is a pretty important person in these communities. He grinds the corn in a corn mill. So all kinds of people would go up there and, you know, kind of try to trick the miller. Never succeeded. And Tom and Will, they get together and say, surely we can figure out something. And Jack he's the youngest brother. He's like, I just don't even want to try. That miller's a mess. And then Tom and Will, they get together and say, I think if we go in together and we we try to go 2-on-1, that we could figure this out. So Tom and Will come up with a plan. And they're going to borrow their daddy's horse, and they shuck out a half a bushel of corn. They sack it up, and together, they ride together bareback up to the mill. And they tell the miller they're there to get their corn ground in the mill, but that he's not going to trick them. Because Tom's going to be down at the bottom where all the cornmeal comes out. He's going to make sure not one grain of cornmeal escapes that sack. And Will's going to be up where they're feeding the corn into the mill, and he's going to make sure there's not one grain of corn escapes. They're going to get every grain of corn they bring there is going to be ground into meal, and they're taking it home. And the miller's like, well, of course that's the way you want to do it. You would think I would try to trick you out of your own corn. So Tom and Will, they get themselves situated just like we're deciding, just like we said. They hitch their horse to a tree out front, and the miller, he leaves, inside the mill, because he's got to raise up the chute so that the water will come through the mill race and start turning the mill wheel. And so the miller comes in, makes sure that Tom and Will think everything's been done fair and square. And then the miller kind of looks around and realizes, because they are watching. They all have a better. Their focus is on, this is the sack that's catching every bit of cornmeal, and the other one's up there at the top making sure every grain goes down the hopper. So the miller, he just goes back outside and he kind of closes the mill gate just a little bit to slow down the mill wheel. So it'll take a little longer. And he goes out and sees, he sees their horse tied up under a tree. And the miller kind of looks around and shouts, hey, does anybody know who belongs to this horse? He shouts it several times. And of course Tom and Will cannot hear. They're in there in the mill. And the mill wheel is grinding. So the miller, he just takes that horse and says, well, if nobody claims it, I guess it belongs to me. And so the miller takes that horse and puts it up in his barn, up the hill above his mill. Well, Tom and Will, they're just so proud. They finish off grinding that corn, and they look at the miller and say, you have not cheated us out of anything. We have everything we brought here, and we're taking it back home. It's all ours, and we got it going. So you just better be ready to sign over your mill and everything you own. And the miller says, well, you got me there. I didn't steal any of your cornmeal, that's for sure. So then Tom and Will, they leave, and they're looking around for their horse. And you know exactly what's happened here. They look around, and where'd our daddy's horse go? And the miller says, horse? Well, I don't know whose that was, but there was a horse tied up outside on this tree, and I hollered around a whole lot. I went all around and asked, did anybody know who it belonged to? And since nobody could claim it, I figured it was trespassing on my property, and it belonged to me. So Tom and Will had to go home. They had to explain to their mama and Jack why they no longer had their daddy's horse. Well, after this, Jack's view was the same as ever. No way he was going to mess with that mill. I mean, why should he? Why would you want to mess with that kind of man? But it got to be the fall of the year, and Jack was ready to go. He needed to go hunting and get some fresh meat for the family. And so he took his old musket loader and his handmade bullets and everything he needed, and he took it off and went hunting. But he didn't have any success, and he kept on, because if you haven't shot anything yet, you keep tracking and seeing if you can. And I'm telling you, it was the fall of the year, so daylight was a little shorter, and dark came a little sooner. And Tom realized he had gotten himself too far away from home to make it back in time before dark came. And he knew he was in a pickle, because it was a cloudy, foggy night. There were no stars, there was no moon, and on top of that, it was all foggy. And Jack could not see his hand before him. He was stumbling around in the dark. He wondered where he was going to land up. What was he going to do? He was stumbling over rocks and roots, and couldn't even tell when he closed his eyes or opened them whether he had them closed or open. It was that dark. And all of a sudden, he runs smack into the wall of some building. And he starts feeling around the building until he gets around to one side that has a door. And he realizes, because he's listening, that he's in the middle. That's where he stumbled into. He's at the mill. Well, it's really quiet. I mean, the dark came so early, Jack knew it wasn't all that late in the evening, but it's very quiet. And he gets to thinking. So he's got to pound and pound on that mill door because he needs a place to just spend the night so he can get going first thing in the morning. And he pounds and pounds, and he can't hear any kind of commotion or any kind of movement inside the mill. But he eventually keeps on pounding, and all of a sudden the door opens, and there's the miller. And he's in his big old nightshirt, and his hair's all messed up on top of his head. And he says, "Jack, what are you doing here?" Jack says, "Well, I apologize. I'm really, really sorry. But I got caught out hunting, and dark came down on me, and I can't see my hand before me. Would you let me just sleep somewhere in your mill, and I will be out of here at first light. I won't bother you a bit." The miller says, "Well, my wife and I, we don't really like to have people overnight guests." Jack says, I won't make a peep. I'll be out of here first thing in the morning." The miller says, "All right, Jack. We got enough beds. You can have another place to sleep." He said, "But wait a minute, Jack. Before you come in, I want to tell you, we don't keep bed pots under the beds upstairs in the loft over the mill. So you're going to have to go to the outhouse now because there's no way you take care of yourself in the middle of the night." So Jack, the outhouse, did his business. And the miller took one candle and leads Jack upstairs to the loft up above the mill. Well, it turns out the miller says, "You know, the miller who was here before me, he had this great big family. And he left this mill to me, and there were 6 big double beds just spread out around the wall of the loft." And the miller says, "My wife and I, we pretty much just sleep in one bed and move to the next one when it gets dirty. It takes us about a year to get through all the beds." Jack hears real soft, sleeping breathing in one of those beds. That's the miller's wife. And he can see by the light of that one candle that there's a cradle beside the miller's wife's side of the bed. That's where the baby's sleeping. Jack says, "You won't even know I'm here." And he finds the bed as far away from the miller and his wife on the other wall as he can get. The miller climbs in bed. Jack climbs in his bed. He's about, to relax and fall off to sleep. And all of a sudden, Jack had himself an idea. He thought, "Oh, I got it." So very slowly and quietly, Jack just sits up in bed. And he listens to all those sounds of sleep. And he gets thinking, now that miller's young wife, she's got this new baby. I bet she can't get through the whole night without leaving the outhouse. I'm just going to be quiet and listen. So Jack just listens. Finally, he hears the sleeping, breathing kind of change, kind of a intake of breath, and he hears the covers kind of move, and he can tell the covers are being shoved back on the bed, and he feels the sound of 2 small feet hitting the wooden floor. And he hears these feet kind of shuffle along. There's no candle lit or anything, but he hears the voice of a young woman saying, "Oh, where's those stairs? I got to get outside. My husband always has us sleeping in all these beds. My goodness." And so Jack hears the miller's wife go downstairs, and when he's sure she's outside, she shut the door to the mill. He gets out of bed very softly, and he feels his way over to the side of the bed where the miller's wife is sleeping, and he leans down, and he feels that cradle, and the baby's sleeping, and he picks up the cradle, and he quietly moves it right there to the side of the bed where he's been sleeping. And then he gets in on that other side of the bed, away from the stairs. And he just lays there. A few minutes later, there's the door of the mill open. He hears some small feet climb up the stairs. And he hears the young woman get to the And she said, oh, where is that bed we're sleeping? It's so dark. Oh, I know. Where were we? What? And she feels around until finally she feels the cradle. Oh, and she knows she's in the right place. There's her baby. So she slides in the sheets right there on the side of the bed where her baby's cradle is, right there. And honestly, nobody could really tell you, or has told you, what happened that night. If the miller's wife discovered that she was ready for bed, or if anything happened between the miller's wife and Jack. But it turns out that Jack kind of overslept the next morning. He was not awake at first light. And when he did come to, what did he see? The miller was at a table, writing something out. And he said, Jack, I never thought anybody could do it, but you have tricked me. You have, so I've already signed over the deed to my mill to you. And now I'm signing over all my worldly possessions. Everything I own is yours. Jack stood up. Miller, I don't know, but I really am interested in everything you own, but I did win all this fair and square. Because evidently I have something of yours that you did not give away. Now, the rest of the story is Jack did get the mill, and he kept the mill, and he ran the mill for a while. But as far as Jack tells us, he did not ask the miller's wife to be his wife now. He let her stay with the miller. But Jack, he managed that mill for as long as he was interested. And then he went on off and made his fortune somewhere else. And that is the story of how Jack fooled. So that's one of the stories. It's a shorter one. The other lovely thing about those stories is they can be linked together to make, yeah, y'all just kind of shake it out. Okay. I'm going to sing to you a little bit more. Yeah, I think it's so cool. I just think it's the coolest story. But there are lots of those kinds of things. And there, some of them, like one of the stories, Donald Davis says, this is an example of storytelling when he was growing up. Nobody had a notion that you weren't interested or didn't have the time to listen for as long as it takes. And when you think about it, we give that kind of time to these big epic movies, right? If it's good, we'll watch something for 2.5, almost 3 hours if it's good, right? If it's a story that we care about and enough happens in it. And that's what these Jack tales would do. Some of them were really short like that one. And others just went on and on and on. Or they could be stopped at any place and everybody knew you could pick it up, kind of the next chapter or another. Okay, so another thing I wanted to tell you about, and I think what I'll do is sing you another old ballad. This is ancient, the Cherry Tree Carol. It's a Christmas song, but you know, these ballads, it wasn't as if you kept seasonal songs just for the season. And this one, the Cherokee Carol, you may recognize it, you know, from your own church experience or just listening to Christmas music. And this is a version that Sheila K. Adams' relatives, Inez Chandler, heard it, sang it, and as the older woman said, she sang it any time she took a notion. Okay. When Joseph was an old man was he courted Mary, sweet Virgin Mary, the Queen of Galilee. Joseph and Mary, they went walking in an orchard so good, where there were cherries and there were berries as red as any blood. Joseph and Mary, they went walking bespoke old Joseph in a voice that was unkind. Let him pick berries, let him pick cherries that brought you now with child. Oh, then bespoke the sweet baby from within his mother's womb. Bow down, thou tallest tree, that my mother might have won. Then bowest down the tallest tree, right into sweet Mary's hand. Oh, see here, Joseph. Oh, see now, Joseph. I have cherries at command. Oh, then bespoke old Joseph, I have done Mary wrong. Fear not, my dearest dear, and be thou not cast down. So Joseph married his sweet Mary, Mary so meek and so mild, and on that Christmas, that cold, cold Christmas, she delivered forth a child. What will you name this child? Mary. Mary, so meek and so mild. I'll name him Jesus, sweet baby Jesus, for he is the Christ child. Okay, so next thing I want to tell you about is a North Georgia poet, Byron Herbert Reese. Any of y'all have to go. If you have to go skedaddle now, because I'm
They have classes.
Oh, yes, and of course, you must go. Thank you for choosing to come to this.
Okay, she's going to continue, so if you're going to stay, please have a seat.
There's a class that starts at 12.
Right. No, I understand. I got to go. Okay, I'll sing you one song from this. So, there's a poet from North Georgia, Byron Herbert Reese. He lived 1917, 1958. He was a farmer, connected to Young Harris College. Anybody ever heard of him? Byron Herbert Reese. There's his poem. Okay. He was a farmer first and a writer second. And he came from the culture that listened to these old stories and old ballads. And he wrote lyric poems, sonnets, and literary ballads. Absolutely, like your assignment, write a ballad. He did this. What I have done, there's a Byron Herbert Reese Society. What I've done is match some of these old ballad tunes to some of his poems. The farm property in Union County near Vogel State Park or Blairsville his family owned, has now been turned into a public place. You can visit there. And it's the Byron Herbert Reese Farm and Heritage Farm and Interpretive Center, where they're trying to do exactly what your displays are doing. They're showing agriculture in the first half of the 20th century, and what I've done is matched up old ballads to some of the poems that he wrote. He wrote these literary ballads. So, one was called West, and he was just, anyway, I don't have time to go into all that, but I want to sing his literary ballad called Lest the Lonesome Bird. And I matched it to the ballad tune of Lord Thomas and Fair Ellender. Oh mother, go riddle my sport, go riddle it all in one. Must I marry Fair Ellender, or bring the brown girl home? Or bring the brown girl home? That's the beginning of Lord Thomas and Fair Ellender. Here's Byron Herbert Reese's poem, Lest the Lonesome Bird, sung to that tune. Mother, lay the fire again and put the kettle on the stove. The hills are curtained by the rain, and I have lost my love, and I have lost my love. Son, the fire leaps in the grate, the kettle whistles through its spout, and supper on the board will wait until your story's out, until your story's out. Well, mother, yesterday I saw my loved one walking in the hills, twining roses in her hair and picking daffodils, and picking daffodils. And there was nothing strange in that. Had she no word to say to you, that you go like an angry cat the whole day through, the whole day through. No, mother, ere the hills became green with the young leaf, I was lost by looking on a colder flame that burns at the heart of frost, that burns at the heart of frost. And yesterday I saw my love with another lover in the wood, and who but I should walk with her in the green solitude, in the green solitude. I could not bear to see her bend her lips to another's wooing, and it was never friend and friend that kissed as they were doing, that kissed as they were doing. Stranger things were done, my son, nothing may come of it at last. So let your head see what is done. The heart runs too fast, the heart runs too fast, the heart too fast, and the feet too fast, and the hands too fast to slaughter. Someone seeks in the woods so vast tonight for a lost daughter, tonight for a lost daughter. And mother, lest the lonesome bird haunt me from the willow, I made her a prayer that no one heard, and gave her a stone for a pillow, and gave her a stone for a pillow. Mother, listen to the rain that slashes ever harder. Her handsome lover I have slain, and left her there to guard her, and left her there to guard her. Mother, listen to the night that howls about the eaves. I hid them well and out of sight with many little leaves, with many little leaves. Mother, hush and tend the fire, and lay the bed with a clean cover. I sleep tonight with with a dread and faithful lover, with a dread and faithful lover. Thank you very much,
Thank
Dr. Lowe,
you.
for inviting me.
Thank you, this was such a treat.
Oh, I'd love to. Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
I have an announcement about lunch. If you're able to go, like stay for lunch, I guess for the next half hour or so, I've got your name on this form. What we're going to do is go through the lunch line. They're expecting us, and then I'll have you initial where you had signed in earlier. And the deal today is for your student special, Piedmont is paying for it, but you're limited to 1 meat and 2 sides. And they'll also give you a piece of bread. And then the drinks will be in here. You'll get a cup. And then, anyway, so now we can go and go through the lunch line. Stuff away.